Thank you, everyone, for joining us today on the West Center webinar series, where we bring you industry and business professionals every week to share their insights that you can apply into your business immediately. Feel free to chat in your questions and turn on those cameras during the course of our webinar today. If you ask any question through chat, we will call on you to unmute. That way you can share your thoughts directly with us. Today, the focus on this webinar will be on strategic partnerships. So finding this right partnerships with larger industry, corporations, and suppliers can be a fruitful but difficult path to navigate. From the challenges of initiating first contact, creating significant value, and leveraging the development for future potential, the process requires experience and insight. Today, we have Geoff Dillon, a seasoned entrepreneur and investor that has been through his fair share of acquisitions in a variety of industry segments. He will discuss the process he has used to determine and create strategic partnerships that can drive sales, increase valuation, and ultimately be leveraged to create early exits for the company. So Geoff, I'm going to turn it over to you. Just do a quick background, and then we'll just dive into some Q&A. And again, just don't forget to chat in those questions as they come along.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. So, yeah, listen, I've enjoyed just a little history. I met up with Ben and the folks at Fresno last fall when they brought me in to try to help with some of the really interesting entrepreneurs and folks that I met there that had some really disruptive technology that I was very, I want to say very appreciative of and very surprised at. So my background, really, the short version is I was trying to become a veterinarian, and unfortunately when I applied to Cornell's vet school, they looked at me and said, gosh, you're a nice looking guy, but did you go to class? So that sort of changed the direction of where my strategy was going to be as far as a businessman. But I stayed in the whole animal industry, if you will, in the beginning, and had a little bit of fun with one of my first companies, American Cyanamid, which was really a pioneer and a leader in their field. I like to say I'm one of the people that pioneered the multi-billion-dollar flea pill industry. And something that I learned very quickly is what I'm going to share with you today is strategic partnerships and how to really differentiate yourself with some of these potential partners that can help you accelerate sales. But when I was reflecting last night, it really started at a young age, right out of college, where at this time, nobody had ever really done direct consumer advertising. Nobody had really done those type of campaigns where you go right to the consumer of your products to get them to be aware of what you have. And I proceeded to do that in the South with this flea pill. And I share it with you because it really showed me that strategic partnerships don't necessarily have to be the classic, who's your competitor, who's people that want to get in the space, who do you want to try to dance with to help you accelerate sales? And by doing that, there might be an opportunity to accelerate literally a sale to the person that helps you build your business. But in this example that I'm sharing, we had consumers in Georgia and Florida literally going into veterinary offices based on a advertising campaign I constructed through Southern Living, and it was direct to consumer advertising. And we had veterinarians calling the home office going, what in God's name is going on? We have people asking us for the flea pill. And what was really interesting was there was a lot of anxiety, but all of a sudden the veterinarians realized, wait a second, we can sell this product and make money. And that's really what started my journey to really look at being creative in marketing campaigns, not only for people that could really impact how companies behave, but it helped me realize that there's opportunities along the way. And I've done this, 6 times now as a CEO. I've tried to engage earlier than later in a business plan. And this is what I'm sharing with you. You should really, when you start, and I wrote a little note to myself that I think is really, really interesting or critical for this conversation. It says, put some structure around your end game in the very beginning of your startup journey. And that pretty much says it all, because most of the people that start companies, they don't really sketch out, what do you really want to be? Well, we want to grow a business and we want to be self-sustaining and we want it to be a unicorn and blah, blah, blah. I ask the audience, no matter what your business is, whether it's a gym, a florist, irrigation, medical device, whatever your business is that you're planning on building, make sure there's space for, hey, what do I really want this to become? Is it a standalone entity, or am I trying to create value in the shortest period of time so I can potentially exit? And I'm from the school that, gosh, if we've been at something for more than 3-4 years and we don't have inquiries about purchasing or partnering with us, then we haven't done a very good job of differentiating our value proposition to the ultimate consumers that are going to use it. But more importantly, my other consumers are those strategic partners that watch us grow and say, hey, this is pretty interesting. Let's learn more about it, because we're either a competitive threat to them or we solve a problem for them. And I've always liked the whole philosophy of, oh, don't let your competitors know what you're doing. No, I want the competitors to know exactly what we're doing. And I want them to know sooner than later, because ultimately, if you're a solution to an area that they have much bigger market share than you do, then why wouldn't you consider a partnership that gets them involved, that also helps you accelerate your sales model? And those milestones that you achieve together lends itself to a potential takeout by those strategic partnerships. So that's been sort of where I've really had some fun trying to build companies and trying to involve those resources that going to help me accelerate sales, right, to an eventual end game of taking the company out.
Perfect. And Geoff, just for the audience, could you give us a little walkthrough of, you don't have to do case by case, but just a little bit overview of the experience you've had doing that?
Yeah. So first one was a company called Corzone. I was brought in by some VCs of a company that was a bit sideways. It was an engineer out of Stanford. And what happened with Corzone? Corzone was a company that helped you repair your native aortic valve. But the bottom line was they had a board that represented a couple of big VCs along with a company called Johnson & Johnson. And so there lies the strategic partnership that was already in play. So what I learned from that experience, yeah, we would like J&J to purchase the company sooner than later. Unfortunately, because how you structure those partnerships, we weren't in a position to really optimize our value. So what I'm saying is, we did some cases. Johnson & Johnson saw the success, and they had seen enough where they made a purchase of our IP sooner than later. And there's the balance. When you structure partnerships, you've got to make sure in the language of who you've identified, if they're on your board, what's the milestone that you've agreed to hit. And once you hit that milestone of value, mutual value, that you have an opportunity to have a exit opportunity that's appropriate for the milestone that you've met. In the case of Corzone, we only did 5 cases. They had seen enough. They bought us for a couple $1 million. That probably wasn't an ideal partnership, but the concept was there. So then I went and moved that forward, Ben, to some other companies that I've recently been involved with that allowed us to build relationships with, in most cases, distributors or companies that could accelerate our awareness with the customers we are trying to reach, and that we agreed to some milestones that we could achieve together, that once you hit those milestones, then you'd already have a set valuation in place for that entity based on that milestone execution.
Yeah, so I always found your process on that, Geoff, pretty fascinating. Could you walk us through, you talk about set up the end structure, towards the beginning. What does that look like? Like what does that entail?
So a perfect example would be, let's call it Company X. They have a product, let's say it's an irrigation, and they feel that they've really got some disruptive technology, and they want to go ahead and they want to prove that they can sell so many widgets in a set period of time at a current ASP. So what you do in any of these type of partnerships is you try to identify who the strategic partner would be with you to help you get those items in front of the consumers, that usually they have a much better and broader relationship with those than you do as a startup. So you dovetail their relationships, they get you into their accounts, you show how well this stuff really works and how people want it, especially to that strategic partner that got you into those accounts. And you've already structured a deal up front that says, hey, if we're able to sell $3 million worth of whatever in a 90-day period of time, we've proved to you, because if you strategic partners say, yeah, that's a good bogey. If you could do that, that's valuable to us, because incrementally that would increase our revenue stream. We agree that that's the target, and that once we hit that target, we've already established a value for the company based on achieving that milestone. So what I'm trying to say is, it's the best of both worlds. Hey, we think we're a $10 million company. If we prove to you in 3 to 6 months, $3 million in revenue, and they go, yeah, we would agree that that's the valuation you should be. Great, you've got them locked in. It's called a put. A put is a set valuation that you've already got in a contract, that when you hit an agreed upon milestone, you hit that milestone, and the value is already established. So the company has the opportunity to either buy you at that put, right there, you're done, or they can pass. But if they do, it unhooks you from that partnership, and you can continue to build standalone value and get into other partnerships. So it's we use it in medical devices. It's a really nice way of getting a sense of what you're really worth based on you hitting a milestone that you both agree to would be valuable.
And when it comes to those milestones, Geoff, I know you mentioned revenue, but in the past you've also spoke about performance. So, hey, did we hit a technical milestone? Did we showcase basically whatever the value prop of the product is? How do you typically set that to where it's like, give us your most troubled customers? If we can accomplish XYZ goal, then this equates to that. Like,
so that's a great question. And one thing that we found in medical, we call them clinical trials. We don't like to start trials in some area where we don't know what the results are already going to be. It's very clear. In my past, I've worked with some really unique folks that are experts in this area. They go, let's design a trial. So if you will, for the sake, let's take it away from the clinical bed of, we think we can do 20 patients in this amount of time, and these are going to be the results post-op, and they're going to be wonderful, and we already know that's going to happen. So when we get into a relationship with another company that says, okay, we'll dance with you, let's do an agreed upon trial, we already know the end game before it happens. So we've sort of set the table so we know we can nail it. So with your question, if I think of more generality, taking away from medical, we try to develop an agreed upon strategy where we know we can have so many irrigation knobs sold in a period of time, and we ask that we have the ability to look at their customer bed, if that makes sense. We don't want to you try to negotiate where you're not in a non-win situation. You want to try to have ideal customers that understand what you're doing, that would absolutely embrace your technology, that you're pretty sure would absolutely blow the numbers out when you set up this agreement. You're not going to set it up with people that are first time to the dance. They've got a history of slow pay. You do your common sense analysis of the people that you want access to from that partner that allows you to generate the revenue you're highly confident you can nail. And then usually the strategic partner says, hey, we're all for it. And you'll get mutual agreement then. And then you sort of put yourself down a pathway where you know you're going to be successful because you've sort of set the table on who is the customer, what's their past history that you can look at. You have a sense of who they already are and what you can do before you start. So it's a win-win. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, clear. And again, to the audience, if there's anything you want us to elaborate on or go and just chat that in, and we'll take you off mute and have you participate with us here. So Geoff, one thing that comes up is we're kind of hitting the relationship. We'll come back to that. But first and foremost, what patterns do you typically look for when figuring out who the right strategic partners are? Great commonalities or any kind of pattern of thinking we could apply here?
Yeah, and I made a couple of notes. Not that I'm not really big on slides and notes. I'm just a free form type of guy. Just off the top of my head, the first thing that jumps out is whatever industry I'm in, I immediately recognize who are the players. So that's easy. Anybody can recognize who the players. Gosh, if you don't know who's in your sandbox, well, you have big problems to start with. So you're going to have an idea who the players are, and then you prioritize them. Who's the big gorilla in the room? Who are the smaller ones? Just prioritize the list of the people in the sandbox that you're getting ready to enter. Once you've done that, then the next important thing is, gosh, how do I get a conversation with some of these different players? Mm-hmm. And this is where you can tell I'm a salesman. I've always enjoyed what I call it at the grassroots level. I like being out in the trenches and talking to the salespeople, the distributors, even the marketing people, and finding out what they know about my sandbox, who the players are in the sandbox, and oh, by the way, do you have a relationship with one of the players in the sandbox? And you'll find out more times than not within the industry that you're playing in and the people that you get to know, they all have relationships that are much higher up the food chain than you picking up the phone and doing a cold call. So you leverage the relationships that you're making as you get into the sandbox. These people are always happy to provide information and show you how much they know. Great, let them pontificate, let them share, but make sure you take notes because they're going to be the ones that are going to connect you a lot higher up the food chain when you want to make that call to one of those players to make them aware of who you are and how you might solve a problem for them. And that starts the relationship. So you prioritize. Now, one other thought. I think of medical, Microsoft, Google. These folks want to get into healthcare. And one of the things that I've sort of done in the last couple of years is be aware of who is thinking about coming into your sandbox. Because this is a completely different opportunity and discussion than people that you currently are going to play with or against. And those are sometimes the most unique conversations you can have because they're looking to learn. They're looking to come in and be very disruptive out of the gate. And they usually have big money. So they want to buy market share. They want to buy companies. R&D in their world, they will spend money like they used to build within. They want to buy outside and bring it within. So what I'm sharing is don't be afraid to learn more about other people that might enter your space because those sometimes are the most unique and can move the fastest with the most money.
Yeah, that's interesting to where you want to consider those that may not be the top of mind or the easiest to recognize right off the bat.
Right.
So, and you mentioned, build the contacts, get those connections as a referral. What are those final contacts? Like, what are the titles they're holding? Like, what are typically the people you
Yeah.
with?
No, and that's listen, there's an incident that's something that just happened this week with a spine company I'm involved with. And so to answer your question, biz dev characters are characters. Be very careful. I learned this from my mentor, Rich Ferrari, a long time ago. Dill, let me just share with you. When you think that you're pitching a business development group of a competitive company about why they should be interested in your company, they're on a fact-finding mission. Be very careful what you share, or I shouldn't say what you share, how you approach them. Because to answer your question, Ben, what I prefer to do, I try to go around biz dev in a nanosecond if I can, and I try to go to a higher level in the food chain, because if I'm able to identify a product champion at a higher level or a higher seat than business dev, I've already got somebody, a plant within that organization that's championing for our cause that can go back and get their biz dev to behave in a way I think would be more appropriate for a mutually beneficial arrangement. And so I've had a lot of success. And so I'll give you the example this week. There's a company out there that, so in spine surgery, people are familiar with x-rays. They've all had x-rays. There's a company out there that I couldn't help but notice is doing something completely different in how they identify inside your body different landscapes, different landmarks, so that when you do surgery, you know where the hell you're going before you go inside the body. And I couldn't help but look at this group and thought, oh my God, they've got this unbelievable imaging system, but they've put themselves into the same category with all the current players. They haven't differentiated themselves to be unique enough to be able to be an alternative to what's being used. So I'm a little bit off track here, but what I'm trying to share is when you can go to those potential strategic partners and help them polish their current story and help them look at it a little bit differently, whether you make a relationship or not, you bring value to them of helping them better understand what they should be really looking at and what the real value proposition opportunities are for them that they wouldn't normally see. And guess what? You happen to be one of those value propositions because you help them polish how they view the world. And so I hope that's not too complicated, but when you're able to get people to really appreciate you, first you got to help them appreciate where they are and where they might go. And you work with those higher level people to get those discussions in play.
Well, and you talk a lot about the differentiation side of things. And I don't know if speaking at the higher level or an example, but what is an example of, or the pattern of thinking that's involved with the differentiation component there to where you're different than just a competitor and you can create another level of a paradigm shift in how they view you?
Yeah. So this goes back to a book the first book I really grasped onto, besides Selling the Invisible by Harry Beckwith, which is a great book. Everybody should read this book. It's about us understanding we're in a service market environment. We're not in a product better environment. Why my product's better than yours. But the book that really I grasped onto that answers your question is called The 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. And the first law is it's better to be first than it is to be best. And the second law is if you're not first, develop a new category you're first in and promote the category. So what I'm trying to share with you, Ben, I think of aspirin. When Tylenol came out, they were a pain reliever. So is aspirin. but they're a non-aspirin pain reliever. They developed a new category they were first in, and the rest is history. So with the audience that's out there, whatever you're developing, I would encourage you, if you're going to differentiate, don't show me why your product's better than somebody else's. Yeah, that's important. What I'm really looking for is that you thought through a strategy of your unique offering is under a different header than the other offerings that are in a certain category. If you have that ability, try to label yours as a different type of category with a solution that's much more new and novel than the current characters that you're going to go and compete against. So if I'm making sense, my differentiation mantra has always been, and I've done it 10 times, I'm not going to get involved in technology unless I truly feel that customers would agree that we have a different category, a different solution that is really worthwhile. And then I'm going to promote the category, and I'm not going to promote my product. And when they finally buy in that the category is very unique and novel, we love it. Well, where do we get something that does this?
Yeah.
Lights out. Does that make sense, Ben?
No, it does. Just you don't want to be second to anything. You always need to be first in something.
That's right.
Okay, so let's take the flip side to where, what are some of the common mistakes that you've seen when someone's engaging a strategic partner or going through that process? Like, what are the key I know you mentioned the biz dev. Are there other components that companies should be aware of when they're starting or engaging in that process?
Well, some of the, and this is interesting that it just dawned on me when you asked that question. Some of the mistakes that I've sometimes made is I've dismissed or not realized the value of certain people in the room, or even at lower levels. So let me be clear. I found out, again, because I love being in the trenches, I love to be out in the field. Some people will not recognize the value of some of these folks that are out there that are seeing what's really going on day to day. And their insight is incredibly valuable in how you would want to understand and then approach subsequently a company they might work for. So even though I said earlier, you try to get to the higher level to have a champion that's for your cause. So when you're not there, they're pulling weight for you with biz dev. One mistake that probably a lot of people might make is not appreciating the value of people in the trenches and how they will arm you with a knowledge base and a strategy that when you finally do leapfrog and try to get the higher ups, you really speak from experience. That's really truly what happens on the street, not what you see in a book or not what you hear from some VP who's just worried about his job position, his title, and singing the company line. So if I'm making sense, Ben, don't ever dismiss that little cup of coffee bumping into a guy at a conference, at some of these, these conferences we go to, and just scrolling around and talking to people that they don't have information that will help you better prepare when you try to get into a partnership. And don't dismiss some of the smaller players. I know the gorillas, you'd like to do a deal with them, but they have clout, they have money, they have their own egos, and it's hard to change a mind that's already made up. It's the hardest thing to do in marketing. Yeah. I love comebacks, and I love people that are hungry, that are unique, that are passionate, and that really are open to helping each other come out of the woods in the ninth inning and absolutely catch the gorilla by the tail and surprise the hell out of everybody. So I don't want to dismiss those other people that are looking to really leapfrog, but they need you to give them a direction on how you can combine with them to leapfrog the pack. That's the action for me.
So one thing we've always talked about, Geoff, is when you hit those milestones, creating kind of a hot environment, an auction-like environment. We've got several players in the sandbox. How do you balance all of that, making sure that there's enough demand? Because if there's not two buyers, you're only going to get less than half the value.
So you go back to the old rule that my dad taught me a long time ago. You cannot have an auction unless you have two bidders. And so recently, with a company that I'm involved with, I have been grooming a relationship for 15 months. And I'm thrilled with this relationship I've groomed with this particular individual that represents some folks. They had a vision for what we could become, but it also produced an interest within our own investors and people that were close to the company that had a different interest of maybe where we could go. You try to be aware that wherever you are in discussions, you try to have more than just one party that you're talking to, because it just helps you keep people honest and it helps your value be higher. So sure, people say, I'm just glad I got one partnership. Well, if you've got one, then that immediately tells me you absolutely have the ability to have two or three or four. It's incumbent upon you to stretch yourself and go get another person at the table. Because if you get one, that's nice, but it won't give you the opportunity to work from a position of power if you have two bidding against each other. So it's really a fault of ourselves that we get too complacent. I remember Rich Ferrari one time at a board meeting said, hey, so how's everything going here? And everybody's looking at each other smiling. It's going great. Everything's on fire. This company, we're the fastest IPO ever in Silicon Valley, 7 months from inception to IPO. And I'll never Rich looking around and going, really? Everything's fine? Now I'm scared shitless because something is going on out there and we're not aware of it. So go back out and find out what it is. So you've always got to be on your toes, Ben, and you got to challenge yourself, besides bringing more people to the party, that things change every day.
Well, and let's dive in a little bit more about, I know we talked about identifying, we look at obviously who's coming in and who's currently there, but making sure, how do you make sure that your technology or what you're doing is of top priority? Like what's the test you use to make sure that the interest level with these partners is going to stick?
Yeah. And so that's a great question. And what you always do when you orchestrate these type of deals, you have to make sure you've got triggers in these deals of performance. So you make sure when you structure your deals that you are not held hostage if they want to get tired and not do the requirements. There's clauses in these, there are penalty clauses. So if you're in a mutually agreed upon transaction that's supposed to be beneficial to both parties, damn well make sure that you've got clauses in there because if it's their sales force I'm dependent on, and they're not, and our product isn't front and center within their monthly most important task for that month, we're in trouble. So it behooves you that when you make these contracts, and based on what they're bringing to your revenue stream, if there's non-performance in certain areas, there's penalty clauses. Maybe it's a deduction of what out-of-pocket costs you have. Maybe it's a penalty that they have to pay out of their own pocket, a premium. If they miss these particular milestones, you're still all right because a premium kicks in. So you're always covered. But you want to drive them to make sure that they're giving your product the attention you need. And that's just devil in the details. That's how you structure clauses and deals to make sure that the downside is covered.
And just diving into a little detail here on the valuation side, you mentioned, can we go into the right of first refusal and why that's, some detractors, what they're saying in your perspective?
Yeah. Listen, we always call it right of first offer. One of the things that happens that we see in medical is if there's a right of first refusal and somebody refuses you and they pass on it, then you're supposedly tainted. Well, J&J passed. Why? And then you've got this thing that you're swimming upstream against all the time. I've always stayed away from right of first refusal. I've always called it right of first offer. You have an opportunity to continue the journey with us. And if you don't, it's all right. But the language is different. It's not as severe. And if they decide to pass, you're still perceived in the industry of, okay, they didn't want to move on it, but you're still in a position to look at other opportunities based on the language, not because you were turned down.
And how do you approach when a company wants to do an exclusive term with you as part of their?
Well, so when you do exclusivity, listen, in my world, exclusivity is a really good thing if you're able to structure a preset valuation. So if you're going to do an exclusive, let me be clear. Make sure that whatever milestones you're agreeing to, because they have exclusive rights, has a put or a set valuation at the end of those milestones that they exclusively have the rights to achieve. Because by doing it that way, and you establishing a value of the company, once those exclusive milestones are met, then they have to move. They've got to either purchase your company for that set valuation that you've agreed to because you gave them exclusivity. So in return for that, we're going to agree right now what the value of the company is going to be at that point. Otherwise, why would I do an exclusive? I'd like to shop it into a couple different areas and have a bidding war. Yeah. I'm fine to forego a bidding war if I've already set a valuation to a milestone execution process. And then you've got to put that activates, or they can pass.
And when it comes to that value, is there a science behind it? Is there more or less just the negotiations, what it comes.
Yeah, it's benchmarks. I mean, everybody has benchmarks in their own specific spaces. So you'll be able to look at previous companies that maybe are similar, that were able to sell based on a certain amount of revenue in a certain period of time. You've got benchmarks of valuations that you can pull from. Many times they don't match up with exactly what you're doing and the time frame you're doing it in and the partnership that you've agreed to enter into, but you have a reference point of a valuation that you could point to that, well, here's a similar one. Let's sort of structure a deal with some history, some retrospective history of a relationship with this strategic partner that you want to dance with, that you can both point to and feel comfortable of the agreed upon valuation from historical input.
And before I get to my next question here, if anyone has any questions or anything you'd like for us to tackle, chat it in and we'll take you off mute and have you kind of communicate your thoughts there. So Geoff, let's say you've got the strategic partnership lined up. You've started the process. What are some of the key components from an operation standpoint or from a company that you're going to implement to make sure that you hit those milestones? Like any advice or just.
Yeah. So it's accountability. It is. As you can probably tell, I'm a bit of a salesman, and I don't have a lot of time for incompetence. So let me be careful here. Incompetence is a function of me not doing my job. It's not the person on the other end that can be perceived to be incompetent. So what I'm saying is, when you get into these relationships, when you have these partnerships, it's incumbent upon myself to make sure I'm intervening in a process with my partner that is a win-win for both ourselves and for them. Because if you've entered into the right structured agreement, they would want to have some type of intervention from somebody designated from us, from our company, right, that works with their team and is able to manage and monitor their team to the degree that we're allowed. But it allows us, I'm sort of the litmus test, I'm the thermostat for my company. I'm able to have a pulse on the performance that I expect them to achieve by giving clear direction and blueprints that we execute against. And it started all the way back in the days of CTS, where we had an amazing team with amazing resources. We knew our blueprint, everybody knew their role, and everybody was assigned tasks that were time-stamped. And there wasn't a lot of wiggle room. Yeah, shit happens, the competitive landscape happens. We're able to pull back and recalibrate based on what's happening in the real world versus what we want it to be. But it's incumbent upon us to be intervening and have a role in that partnership so that these people don't fail because of something that we didn't give them the right information on, or the tools to execute appropriately on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that was going to my next point is making sure that you keep the engagement moving during this process to where it's not a back burner topic for whoever you're partnered with. So you're doing the strategic partnership. What happens when a milestone isn't met, or let's say trajectory is just not following through to the top level? Do you renegotiate or?
Yeah, no, you have breakup clauses. I mean, some of the things that pretty standard stuff. If it depends on the severity of how time sensitive is this milestone you've agreed to, and how much does it impact your eventual valuation. Some milestones won't be as important as others as far as your eventual exit enhanced valuation in the shortest period of time possible. So you establish the priorities of which are really, these are breakup deals that if you miss these, we have a breakup clause. And it's normal standard industry information. Hey, if you miss it, we're able to pull out. And if they're signing it, they realize they don't want to miss it. But you, again, Ben, you prioritize the milestones that you've set, what their relevance is into the enhanced valuation you're trying to achieve in the shortest period of time that would lead to the quickest exit that us as a startup would like to realize. And you prioritize them, you measure them, you quantify, measure them, and you have some clauses involved where if you miss these, this is a deal breaker. But not everyone's a deal breaker. Sometimes shit happens and we're still new, so we got to be a little bit empathetic of we're learning together.
Okay. Now, this is I know I've asked a version of this early on, but when you have a first-time entrepreneur that hasn't gone through this process, what are some of the fatal mistakes that can be made? And I want to kind of the part two to that is, who do you need with experience to help you through this process? Like, who should companies be turning to or looking for to help them doing this? But I want to start with part one as far as like what could happen if you don't line up the right experience in the room to go through this process with you.
Yeah, well, listen, there's a bunch of old dogs like me out here. So whatever industry you're in, there's going to be, and I hate the word the consultants and advisors, and I've got a dime for every one of I had that have brought no value. I'd be a multi-millionaire. So easy for me to say that, but I think in this day and age, if I was going to do this all over, the 7 different industries that I've participated in, I've been fortunate to usually hook in with a known commodity who has a pedigree and has a passion, that's a great mentor and coach that really enjoys the action. That's who I am now. I'm an old guy, but I love the action. So you find that person. They can be a shadow, they can be a mentor, they can be a best friend, but they're just willing to share, hey, I've done it before. Let me just share with you. You still will make the mistakes, but I'll just give you a menu of some a la carte items to think about that might help shorten your pathway to the next step of your success tree that you're trying to avoid, those paths, those chutes and ladders that take you to start all over again. So I think that that's just like what your facility is doing right now. You brought folks like ourselves in to help some of your folks sooner than later. Hey, this is where you might want to consider. You don't tell them what to do. You share some ideas, and then they can look at it on their own and make the decision. But you've given them a blueprint that's pretty accurate, or I should say consistent in its ability to avoid pitfalls. So that's where you start. That's my suggestion. Now give me part 2, because I'm old. I can't remember.
So part 2 is, let's say, let's just take someone like myself. Let's say if I'm taking my company to a strategic partner and I'm ready to engage this process, or they're interested.
Yep.
What do I need to prep in advance? Is there experience that should I be tapping into certain people? Should I be bringing in different things? Like what do I need to make sure that this is successful?
Listen, to me, it's a no-brainer. I would always have, and I've always been the type of guy who loves, it's true in my case, especially because I'm not that smart. I love extremely talented people around me. So to answer your question, when I go into these situations, if I can have a Rich Ferrari go with me, or a Doug Erickson, or some of these people that have already established a pedigree in strategic relationships and partnerships, well, gosh darn it, you bring them. And you're not intimidated by it, you're embracing it, and it helps you come across, because perception becomes reality. And those great leaders and CEOs usually have surrounded themselves with incredible talent that they haven't been afraid to bring to the dance, whatever those different dances are, that ultimately makes them look smarter, the CEO, than you probably really are, because you handed off discussion points with those people you brought into those discussions where they're experts. And they just come across really smooth and silky, and you come out of that meeting and people think, wow, this group's really got their shit together. So don't be intimidated or afraid that you've got to show everybody you can do it by yourself, because that's your recipe for disaster.
Sure. Well, that makes a lot of sense. And are these, when you're bringing these people in, are they structured as advisors? Are they board members? Are they executives?
Yeah, I think in the beginning, what I've learned with this last startup, and I think I'm going to do one more. I swore I'd never do another one, but I think that you bring them in as advisors or consultants. It's real simple, and usually they'll want a little piece of equity. But remember, equity is your most important capital. One thing I realized in one of my recent companies, we gave out too much equity too fast. It was a mistake, and I should have been more alert. So what I'm trying to say is, be careful with the equity you have. But there's an old saying, pigs get fat, hogs get slaughtered. Be comfortable to have an advisor or two come in that are key, that have some action, right? They have some play in the game. And sometimes these advisors will even invest in your company. So there's a win-win. They're going, hey, we believe in it. We're going to put some we're going to put some skin in the game, but we'd also like to get some equity also. And they're not always going to do that. So you'll have to have those key people you've identified that make a difference in a meeting, that are in advisory capacity, that maybe have a 2-year investment deal. So you have them for 2 years, right? And the equity is based on performance. You just stage it, hey, if we're able to do this in a year, then we're able to boost it in year 2. It's all milestone based and it's rewarded based, and they don't have a problem with that, but you've engaged them, you haven't given away the farm, and you start them there. As far as a board, boy, before you start building boards out, be very careful. You've got to really have those industry people that are respected and known, and they come at a different cost. I know there's value, but they also come at a different cost.
So, Geoff, where could now? I know you've got. Let's just elaborate on this real quick. I know you've got a case study done on one of the companies you've been involved with. Am I right on that?
Yeah, that's right. Harvard did one years ago.
And if people wanted to learn more and find what's the name, what's the title of that, to where we could kind
Yeah,
of.
so cardiothoracic systems, CTS. I want to say it was, I'll send it to you, Ben. It was written up a Harvard Business Review in the end of '99. So it's an old case study, but it was where we pioneered coronary off-pump bypass. But it was a really interesting case study of how we developed a new category we were first in, and how we were able to accelerate our ability to sell the company sooner than later based on the value proposition or the category that people embraced. So, and I'm hoping to have another case study shortly on a company I'm currently with that has been a very unique journey for 3 years, but I think is going to get to a really nice end game. But within that comes a lot of knowledge that's gleaned over time.
Yeah. Well, I'd argue that that case study could be the best way to just kind of learn more about this outside. What other resources, or I don't know, just general ways that someone could just kind of elaborate and dig in further into this process and learn more about it, whether there's reading resources or videos and anything that comes to mind?
You know, to be honest with you, I've never really, this is funny, I've never really researched books on the art of strategic partnerships. It's just been more ingrained in my mind of, again, I've always tried to just use common sense. So to answer your question, Ben, I'm not sure. I'm sure with going online today, people can put in strategic partnerships, the art of the blah, 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 and it's all out there. I'm just trying to encourage people, and I'll go back to that little piece of paper that I spooled up and threw in the trash, but it hit me this morning. I'm just suggesting that people put some structure around your end game in the very beginning of your startup journey. Because most folks just, I get it, especially the kids. They want a business, they want to pound their chest, they want to show they've got something different, share with their friend. That's great, but if you haven't really sooner than later thought about where are you really trying to go,
Yeah.
it's a trap. It's an easy mistake, and it's so much fun if you think about in the beginning, oh, well, why should I think there's going to be value? No, I'm going to curse it. Bullshit. What you should be thinking about is, do you want this to be a long-term business? Do you really think it's going to last? What, 1 out of 100 make it anyway, so don't kid yourself. At least have a pathway that you've thought through that maybe gets you into a relationship with a partner sooner than later, so they can offset your costs, your burn, the capital needed to produce revenue that comes at a cost. Oh, what a wonderful world we're in if we're able to have a partner offload a lot of that energy and time that helps us accelerate the value build. And not only do they do that, but then they also become an option for a potential takeout. Then you can do a lot more startups in a shorter period of time versus just becoming a zombie, which most of them become, and they're around forever until finally somebody's got to put a bullet in their head.
Yeah.
Sorry to sound negative, but it's just.
Well, I want to elaborate on that, because I know you and we've discussed in the past early exits and what that may entail. Can we just elaborate on that a little bit further about someone that's saying, hey, I want this to be this massive company, versus the thought process of, hey, 2-3 years, we're going to hit some milestones, we're going to sell. I know you basically covered that, but what's the advice to someone that's like, I want this to be like a massive company over the long term?
Take the emotion out of it. So how do you do that? How do you take the emotion out of that complexity? You measure it, you quantify it. Start in the beginning of saying, if we're able to hit these type of goals, whatever those goals are, make sure they're realistic, but make sure you think they create value, whether it's for you or for a potential partner. Create in the beginning measurable goals that if you miss them, be aware that either you weren't accurate or you weren't being honest with yourself, or it's a lot harder to hit than you thought. That you have triggers in place, or markers, better word, you have markers in place over year 1, 2, 3, that you want to establish some type of performance criteria within certain guardrails, pathways, that if you miss those, then step back and really reevaluate your business plan, and what you really think you want to become, because here's the other variable that we never take into account. the competitive landscape is going to change like nobody's business, no matter what you think you're going to grow up to be. And you best make sure you know how you're going to grow your children. You got the little thing on the wall where you measure their head every year. You see that they're growing, they're eating their Cheerios, they're doing the right things. But it's just like a startup. Make sure you've got measurement in place, because on top of that, the environment is going to change on you. And if you're not able to pivot quickly, and this is something that I'm glad you touched on. I think the success, when I looked at the 10 companies I've been involved with, I did this for this course, this thing today. The first one went in 2 years, the second in 3, the third in 2, the fourth in 3, the fifth in 3, the sixth in 3, the seventh in 3, the eighth in 1, the ninth and 10th still out for discussion. Each one of them had something in common in that short period of time. Pivot. Unbelievable that where we started and where we really ended up with our value proposition, it was a pivot. And the reason why is because we didn't know what we didn't know until we went to the consumer. We had actual interaction. The competitive landscape came in, and then we got more knowledge. And when we got more knowledge, we said, oh, we've got something cool, but we're going to polish it. We're going to pivot it. Our ego did not get in the way of pivoting the business model to more appropriately take advantage of the buying community and what we were growing up into. And so I think that even with CTS, we started off with an incision for a heart procedure that was completely different than where we ended up with the company. It completely shifted, and we sold the company on a different value proposition because our pivot was able to get more surgeons to participate in a much safer procedure than the beginning of that company, where it was a much more complicated procedure that fewer people could really get involved in, and thus, what's the value? So yeah. Pivot is a really big thing, Ben. I know this is off topic, but
no, that's a great point. That's a great point, especially just figuring out, hey, what the differentiation standpoint, like where can we end our journey on a solid differentiation that creates value?
Yep. Yeah.
Well, let me turn it. Does anyone have any questions? I know we're getting towards the end here. I'm going to ask probably one or two more on my end, and then we can just wrap it up. But if you have any questions, now would be a good time to get it in. So, does there come a point to where, let's go to the negative side. Does there come a point to where if a company's not successfully finding these strategic partnerships, that they need to take a good hard look at what they're offering and maybe what they're doing to ensure that, hey, maybe we do need to make the pivot. Maybe we do need something. Like what are those signs for someone to take that honest feedback from the market to understand if what they're offering is really of value?
Yeah, well, here's the hard thing, and they write chapters about this. It's called founder's disease. So let me touch on this, because I am a co-founder. I've been a co-founder a couple of times. So to answer your question, it's really hard for the emotional attachment that founders have to be open to information that they can't potentially spin, that we're still doing the right thing and let's stay the course. And that's the hardest thing. You have to sort of have an audit system in place. So I would also suggest that people have some type of audit system that does get the respect of a founder or founders to better understand that they're in a situation that they've got to come to grips with sooner than later, versus, well, we can make it better, we can massage it, we can manage it, we can make the numbers, you can make the numbers say whatever you want them to. But if you look at numbers the way they should be, numbers are numbers, they're objective. Well, they have no emotion. It's how you interpret the numbers that brings emotion in. So I'm just from the old school that I get a real sense of being in the street, being in the trenches, hearing get out there, understand what's really going on versus people in your building telling you what's going on. And if you'll do that, you'll get a real sense of, are we on the mark or are we not? You know, you come back, you pull back. Who was it? Jack Welch. Some of these people that ran these companies, they were out there and they really listened very quickly of what was really happening and were made the appropriate adjustments. It becomes within that behavior, the nature of the person. You can't change behavior. Behavior is a bitch to change as you get older. As I've always said, I think I'm a master at understanding what it takes to change behavior. It's brutal, because I've got an old saying, Ben, attitude, what you say, versus behavior, what you really do, it rarely matches up. And there is the opportunity to differentiate yourself from the pack if you have those line up.
Yeah. Well, great, Geoff. I want to thank you for taking the time today, sharing all of your thoughts. I know we have could you repeat the name of the case study one more time for us?
Yeah, so cardiothoracic systems, CTS. Um, it was Harvard. I want to say it was the end of '99. Grace. It'd probably be in the Harvard Business Review or the Harvard Case Study for whatever it's worth. It's old, but it was still a representation of something that was very novel. 7 months to IPO. That's still a record here in the Valley for a medical device company. And one of the people I see on this this call, Jula, he was a resource we brought in that absolutely helped us accelerate what the real measurement criteria was of the success of these procedures. So when you get those type of people that produce numbers that are just objective, subjective, it helps us be able to tell a better story. So I don't know what else. I'll send it to you, Ben, so you have it in case people are interested. You can forward it if that's all right.
Yeah, no, that'd be great.
Right
and
on.
Anyone, just shoot me or Grace an email and we'll send it your way.
Yep.
Geoff, again, Geoff is one of our advisors at the Wet Center. So for those companies here on the call that are interested, make sure to give us a contact to learn more. Geoff's been a great resource in a lot of ways for the Wet Center here. And Geoff, as always, thanks for taking the time to help us today.
Peace, pal. Thank you so much for having me on.
Of course. And everyone will follow up next week with another series, and we'll keep it rolling. Take care.
Right on.